They called me a cheap copy in front of everyone. So I opened my phone, and within minutes, every smile at that table began to fade. How did a simple family gathering turn into the moment I finally walked away from everything I'd been paying for? My name is Candace. I'm 30 years old, and at the time this happened, I worked as a financial consultant, ironically helping strangers build stable futures while quietly destroying my own. Tonight, I want to tell you the story of how I realized my place in my family wasn't daughter or sister. It was sponsor. It started in a high-end restaurant in California, the kind with soft amber lighting, crisp white tablecloths, and menus that don't bother listing prices because the people who eat there don't ask. I sat at the edge of a long table, hands folded neatly in my lap, watching my parents and my sister flip through the menu like they were browsing vacation postcards. My father, Frank, ordered appetizers without looking up. My mother, Lorraine, asked about wine pairings. They spoke excitedly about their upcoming luxury cruise, debating ocean views versus balcony suites. No one acknowledged that I had already paid the non-refundable deposit. I stared at the crystal water glass in front of me and tried not to think about how the cost of one appetizer was more than my weekly grocery budget. That's when it hit me. I wasn't here as family. I was here as funding. My sister Deanna arrived almost an hour late, sweeping into the room like she was stepping onto a red carpet. She wore a shimmering designer dress that I had bought her for her birthday. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, announcing her entrance. She barely glanced at me. Her eyes lingered on my simple blazer for half a second before she smirked. No apology for being late. No greeting. Just judgment. She dropped into her chair and laughed loudly, making sure nearby tables could hear. Cheap copies should never expect original treatment. The words landed harder than she probably intended, or maybe exactly as hard as she wanted. My parents chuckled politely. I looked at my mother, hoping stupidly for backup. Lorraine adjusted her pearl necklace and sighed. "You should really stop competing with your sister," she said. "Your jealousy is ruining the evening." Jealousy. That word stung more than the insult, because it erased everything. It erased the nights I stayed up late balancing budgets so Deanna could focus on her creative career. It erased the rent checks I'd written, the car payments I covered, the vacations I funded, the emergencies I handled quietly. It erased the version of me that had postponed graduate school to help the family, the version that worked overtime while everyone else posted photos from rooftop bars. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a polite smile. Inside, something cracked. The waiter came by to take orders. Deanna ordered lobster. My parents added steaks. I ordered a side salad and tap water. While they talked about luxury cars and investment properties, I drifted somewhere else. Back to my first job after college. Back to the day my sister called crying because her lease application had been rejected. Back to my mother saying, "Family helps family." I remembered the quiet pride I felt the first time I added Deanna as an authorized user on my credit card. I thought I was helping her build stability. What I was really doing was teaching her that my money didn't belong to me. Their laughter echoed around the table, warm and careless. I felt invisible. That's when my hand slid beneath my napkin and wrapped around my phone. I didn't announce anything. I didn't raise my voice. I simply opened my banking app. The soft glow of the screen illuminated my face while everyone else stayed busy celebrating lives they weren't paying for. I navigated to the security settings, then to authorized users. 3 names appeared on the screen: Frank, Lorraine, Deanna. I stared at them while my mother bragged about spa packages. My finger hovered for just a second over Deanna's card. I marked it as lost. The app asked for confirmation. This will immediately suspend all transaction privileges. I pressed confirm, no hesitation. Then I did the same for my parents. One by one, every financial lifeline connecting them to me disappeared with a quiet digital click. I slipped my phone back into my purse just as the waiter returned carrying the black leather folder containing the bill. He placed it gently in the center of the table and stepped back. My father didn't even glance at the total. He slid the folder toward me like he always did. That small, unconscious gesture said everything. I reached into my wallet, not for a credit card, for a single $20 bill. I placed it neatly on top of the folder. "That covers my salad," I said. The scraping sound of my chair against the floor finally broke their conversation. Everyone looked up. Frank frowned. "What are you doing?" I stood, smoothing my blazer. "I'm paying for my own meal," I replied calmly, "and I have some financial restructuring to take care of." My mother gasped softly. "Candace, don't embarrass us." I picked up my purse. Frank grabbed the folder and shook his head. "Don't be petty." He pulled out his gold credit card and handed it to the waiter with a smug smile, shooting me a look that said, "You'll come around." I paused near the entrance. I wanted to see it. The waiter returned less than a minute later, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir. The transaction didn't go through." Frank's face flushed. "That's impossible," he snapped. "That card has a higher limit than your annual salary." Deanna rolled her eyes and pulled out her own platinum card, flipping her hair dramatically. "Here, use mine." The rejection came instantly. Her confidence collapsed in real time. The manager started walking toward their table. Voices rose. Accusations flew. I didn't wait to see how they'd explain a $500 bill with 0 working cards. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped into the cool California night. As I walked toward my car, their panicked voices faded behind me. And for the first time in years, I felt lighter, because that was the moment I stopped being their bank and started becoming myself. I barely slept that night. Not because I regretted what I'd done, but because my nervous system was still unwinding from years of swallowing things I was never meant to carry. When morning finally came, the California sun slipped through my curtains like nothing in the world had changed. I stood in my kitchen, holding a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, staring out at the quiet street below, trying to remember the last time I'd woken up without checking my phone first. For once, I didn't feel the urge to fix anything. Then my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call. It was a notification. The GPS tracker on the Mercedes G-Wagon legally registered in my name had just been activated. I opened the app. The little icon that usually sat peacefully in front of Deanna's luxury building was moving, slowly, deliberately. My sister's precious status symbol was being lifted onto a flatbed. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just sat down at my desk and watched the update refresh in real time while I took a slow sip of coffee. I had called the leasing company immediately after leaving the restaurant the night before. I told them I was voluntarily surrendering the vehicle and terminating the insurance coverage effective immediately. From their perspective, it was simple business. A car tied to a guarantor who had withdrawn support was a liability. They acted fast. Too fast for Deanna to spin a story. The timestamp showed exactly 8 a.m. I imagined her waking up to the sound of metal chains scraping concrete. I pictured her rushing onto the balcony in one of her silk robes, hair still messy, mascara untouched, watching strangers haul away the thing she loved more than any human being. 6 months earlier, she'd posted a photo leaning against that same car with a caption about manifesting abundance. Now abundance was being towed away. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair. That was domino number 1. Domino number 2 followed less than 10 minutes later. My phone rang. It was the property manager from Deanna's penthouse building. He spoke politely, professionally, the way people do when they're delivering news that will ruin someone's day. He explained that since I had formally withdrawn as financial guarantor overnight, Deanna's lease agreement was now void under the building's terms. Without proof of sufficient income or a new qualified guarantor, she had 24 hours to vacate the premises. 24 hours. I thanked him calmly and ended the call. I didn't feel powerful. I felt tired. For years, I had been quietly holding up an entire fantasy world for people who treated me like furniture. I had paid for their comfort while learning to minimize my own needs. And now that I had stepped away, their reality was collapsing under its own weight. My phone started vibrating violently across the mahogany surface of my desk. Deanna. I let it ring. Once. Twice. 4 times. I wanted her to sit in the panic for a moment. When I finally answered, I put her on speaker and set the phone down beside my laptop. She didn't wait for me to say hello. "Are you out of your mind, Candace?" she screamed. "My car is gone. My building is threatening eviction. What the hell did you do?" Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Not anger. Fear. real fear. For the first time in her life, she was facing a problem that couldn't be fixed with a filter, a caption, or a strategically placed tear. I listened quietly while she spiraled. I opened a document on my computer and began typing a sentence I'd been rehearsing in my head since last night. She finally paused to take a breath. I leaned back in my chair. "You said you were the original," I replied evenly. An original should be able to buy her own car and lease her own apartment. Silence. Then shallow breathing. I continued. "So, why are you panicking about losing a copy's money?" The line went dead quiet. I could practically hear the moment my words landed in her mind. She understood exactly what I was doing. I was handing her own cruelty back to her, untouched. "You're doing this to humiliate me," she hissed. "I'm a public figure. My neighbors are watching. You're destroying my life." I didn't raise my voice. "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm just no longer paying for it." Her breathing turned jagged. "You're going to regret this. I'm telling Mom and Dad everything." I ended the call, not because I was afraid, but because I had work to do. I stared at the blank screen of my phone for a long moment after it went dark. For 30 years, the threat of involving our parents would have sent me into apology mode. I would have rushed to smooth things over, to compromise, to absorb blame that didn't belong to me. But now, without my financial support, their outrage was just noise. They were toothless tigers roaring at a storm. I went back to reviewing my emails. 2 days passed without direct contact. No calls, no messages, just a strange, unfamiliar quiet. I allowed myself to breathe. I took walks in the morning. I cooked real meals instead of surviving on coffee and deadlines. I even slept through an entire night without waking up anxious. But I knew it wasn't over. People like Deanna don't go down gracefully. They burn everything on the way down. On the third morning, my phone started buzzing nonstop while I was reviewing a manuscript. It was notification after notification from a social media platform I barely used. Then my best friend Sarah called. Her voice trembled. "Candace." She posted a video. She sent me the link. I hesitated. Then I clicked. Deanna was sitting on the floor of her now empty apartment, positioned perfectly in frame. The lighting was soft. Her makeup was flawless, even through tears. She looked straight into the camera and told a story. A story about how her jealous younger sister had manipulated elderly parents. A story about stolen assets. A story about betrayal. She painted herself as a struggling artist abandoned by family. She painted me as a cold financial predator. The comments were already filling with strangers calling me heartless. Sarah stayed on the line while I watched. "People are tearing you apart," she said. "Are you okay?" I closed the video. My stomach felt hollow. I took a slow breath. "No," I said quietly, "but I know exactly what to do." Because if Deanna wanted a public story, I was ready to give them the truth. And unlike tears, mine came with receipts. I didn't respond to Deanna's video. Not publicly. Not privately. I learned a long time ago that arguing with someone who feeds on attention only makes them louder. And Deanna had always been loud when she felt cornered. Instead, I opened my laptop. If she wanted to tell stories, I was ready to show facts. I spent the next 2 hours combing through 5 years of digital banking records. Every transfer, every payment, every charge that had my name on it but her lifestyle attached to it. Rent, car leases, designer handbags, luxury vacations, emergency credit card balances, utilities, subscriptions. It was all there, neatly archived in my financial history like a silent witness that had been waiting its turn to speak. As I scrolled, memories surfaced with each line item. The month she needed a break and flew to Miami while I covered her electricity bill. The holiday season when I skipped gifts for myself so she could post photos in matching outfits with her influencer friends. The countless times I told myself it was temporary, that once she got on her feet, things would change. They never did. I highlighted the amounts in yellow, added dates in red, organized everything into chronological order. By the time I finished, I had created a 50-page PDF that told a very different story from the one Deanna had cried into her camera. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was math, and math doesn't lie. I stared at the file on my desktop for a long moment before sending it. Not to social media, not to strangers. I opened our extended family group chat. It had been buzzing nonstop since Deanna's video went live. Aunts asking if she was okay, cousins sending heart emojis, uncles offering prayers. No one had asked me anything. I uploaded the PDF without a single word, no caption, no explanation, just evidence. The typing bubbles stopped almost immediately. 23. Read receipts appeared one by one. I watched the names light up and go quiet. Nobody knew what to say after that. They saw the thousands spent on handbags while Deanna claimed to be homeless. They saw rent checks written month after month. They saw luxury expenses disguised as help. The narrative collapsed under the weight of its own numbers. My phone stayed silent. Then, finally, a private message came through. From my mother. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She didn't acknowledge the lies Deanna had told. Instead, she wrote, "Take those statements down immediately. You're destroying your sister's reputation. How can you be so calculating with family?" I read it twice. Then I locked my screen and placed the phone face down on my desk. Because in that moment, something inside me finally broke free. I realized my mother wasn't afraid of the truth. She was afraid of losing control over the story. For decades, I had been the quiet one, the reasonable one, the one who absorbed discomfort so everyone else could stay comfortable. But I wasn't doing that anymore. I hadn't destroyed Deanna's reputation. She had done that the moment she decided to lie about the person who was paying for her life. The digital storm faded as quickly as it had formed. People who had been ready to crucify me went quiet. Some relatives sent awkward messages. Others said nothing at all. The truth had arrived. And unlike tears, it didn't need background music. For a brief moment, things were calm. I allowed myself to believe that maybe this was where it ended. I was wrong. Because when people lose access to money, sympathy, and control, they don't suddenly grow character. They grow desperate. A week later, my family was no longer staying in luxury apartments or driving expensive cars. They had been evicted and retreated to my parents' suburban home, crowding into a guest room filled with resentment and panic. Instead of looking for jobs or selling off the remaining designer items, they started digging. Literally, they tore through boxes in my childhood bedroom, searching for anything they could use. Old notebooks, college paperwork, forgotten folders. That's when Deanna found my tax documents from 3 years ago. Inside was everything she needed. My full social security number, my personal identification details. She didn't hesitate. She used my identity to apply for a predatory payday loan, $10,000. She believed I wouldn't notice, or that I'd be too ashamed to report my own sister. She was wrong. I had spent years protecting everyone else, but I had also built layers of digital security around myself. Immediately after cutting them off financially, I had activated enhanced identity monitoring, alerts, credit freezes, location tracking. So when my phone vibrated violently on my desk with a red warning banner, I knew something was wrong before I even opened it. New credit line opened under your name. My chest tightened. Minutes later, the fraud prevention department called. The representative spoke calmly but urgently, reading details from his screen. "We're calling to confirm a high-interest loan of $10,000 that was just approved and dispersed to an external checking account belonging to a Miss Deanna. Did you personally authorize this transaction?" I closed my eyes. Hearing it out loud made everything real in a way that screenshots never could. "No," I said. "I absolutely did not authorize that." There was a pause. Then keyboard clicks. "Will initiate an immediate fraud investigation. We recommend freezing your credit reports and filing an identity theft claim." I agreed. My hands were steady, even though my heart felt like it had dropped into my stomach. After the call ended, I sat quietly at my desk, staring out the window. For years, I had shielded my family from consequences. I had paid off mistakes, smoothed over irresponsibility, covered for entitlement. But this wasn't emotional abuse anymore. This was a felony. They honestly believed I would quietly absorb this too, that I would pay off the loan to protect the family name, that I would keep sacrificing myself for their comfort. They forgot something. I was no longer their emotional bank account. I organized the fraud alert emails into a new digital folder and labeled it simply evidence. I didn't call them. I didn't demand explanations. Criminals don't deserve warnings. They had crossed a line they couldn't step back over. And as I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, a strange calm settled over me. They had taken my kindness for weakness for 30 years. Now they were about to learn the difference. 48 hours after the fraud alert appeared on my phone, I walked through the heavy glass doors of the Los Angeles Police Department with a thick manila folder tucked under my arm. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Everything about the lobby felt clinical, detached, like the building itself had learned not to absorb human emotion. I approached the front desk and asked to speak with a detective. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. Inside the folder was every piece of proof I had carefully gathered over the past week. Printed loan applications, IP address logs provided by the bank's fraud department, time-stamped alerts from my identity theft monitoring service, screenshots of the external account where the money had been sent. My sister's name was on everything. A detective reviewed the documents slowly, his expression tightening with each page. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were serious but kind. "Are you absolutely certain you want to pursue criminal charges against an immediate family member?" I didn't answer right away. For a moment, I saw Deanna as a child, borrowing my sweaters without asking. I remembered the nights she crawled into my bed after bad dreams. I remembered thinking it was my job to protect her. Then I remembered the loan. I remembered the lies. I remembered the way she had stared into a camera and painted me as a monster while spending money that wasn't hers. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm certain." I signed the sworn affidavit without a tremor in my hand. The legal machinery moved faster than I expected. Financial fraud involving identity theft is taken very seriously in California. Within hours, the case was transferred to a specialized unit. 2 uniformed officers were dispatched to the rundown motel on the outskirts of the city where my family had been staying since their eviction. I wasn't there to see it, but later I learned that the neighbors reported screaming and crying coming from their room when Deanna was served with an official summons for questioning regarding identity fraud and grand larceny. She had always believed that tears could get her out of anything. Police officers are immune to performance. My phone began ringing almost immediately after the officers left. Voicemail after voicemail. My mother's voice cracked as she begged me to meet them at a neutral location. My father shouted about loyalty. They wanted to talk things through. They wanted to find a solution. They wanted me to undo reality. I agreed to meet them the following afternoon at my attorney's office, not because I planned to negotiate, but because I wanted to deliver my final answer in person. I arrived early, dressed in a tailored suit that felt like armor. I sat at the head of the polished conference table while my lawyer organized documents beside me. My parents entered together. They looked older, smaller, like gravity had finally caught up to them. Deanna wasn't there. Her lawyer had advised her to remain silent, but her absence filled the room. Frank sat heavily in his chair and rubbed his temples. Lorraine clasped her purse in both hands like it was the last solid thing in her life. My father slammed his palm against the table. "Candace, are you seriously going to send your own flesh and blood to prison over a few $1,000s?" he snapped. "We'll find a way to pay you back. Just drop the charges before this gets any worse." I studied his face. He genuinely couldn't comprehend what had happened. To him, this was still a family disagreement, not a crime. My mother reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her grip desperate. "She made a stupid mistake because she was scared," Lorraine sobbed. "You're destroying her future. What kind of family does this to each other over money?" I gently pulled my hand away. Then I spoke. Family doesn't steal identities. Family doesn't take out predatory loans in someone else's name. Family doesn't weaponize lies when accountability arrives. Deanna is an adult, I said evenly. She made a criminal choice. And adults face consequences for criminal choices. The room went quiet. My lawyer cleared his throat and slid a document toward them. Settlement terms. Restitution for the fraudulent loan. Legal fees. damages for emotional distress, and one non-negotiable clause. Deanna would permanently delete every social media account tied to the false narrative she had created. Frank stared at the paperwork like it was written in another language. Lorraine's shoulders slumped. They had one option left. They sold their house. The home I had grown up in, the place where I learned to stay quiet, to be useful, to disappear when emotions got inconvenient, was listed for an immediate cash sale. They accepted an offer far below market value. The proceeds went directly into escrow to cover Deanna's debt and the legal fallout. It was a steep price for enabling a narcissist, but they paid it willingly, because the alternative was seeing their favorite daughter in an orange jumpsuit. The agreement also included a permanent no-contact order. My lawyer pointed to the clause carefully. Once this is signed, he said, they will be legally prohibited from coming within 100 yards of you, ever. I didn't hesitate. I signed. When Deanna finally entered the room to finalize her portion of the paperwork, she looked hollowed out. Her eyes were swollen from weeks of crying over a life she could no longer afford. She stared at me with a mixture of rage and despair. "You've taken everything from me," she said hoarsely. "My home, my career, my reputation. I hope you're satisfied." I capped my pen and stood. I didn't raise my voice. "I didn't take anything that belonged to you," I replied. "I just stopped giving you what was mine." She looked away. I walked out of the conference room while my parents' voices blurred into meaningless noise behind me. Inside the elevator, I finally exhaled. I knew I had just signed the death warrant for our relationship, but I had also saved myself, and for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. 3 weeks passed after the settlement, but it didn't feel like time was moving normally anymore. It felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath while everything rearranged itself. The legal negotiations dragged on quietly behind closed doors. My lawyer handled most of it, sending me updates in short, clinical emails. Numbers, dates, signatures, terms. Every message stripped away another layer of the illusion my family had been living inside for decades. My parents' remaining savings evaporated under legal fees and restitution. Their retirement plans dissolved overnight, and eventually, the only asset they had left was the house. The same house where I grew up learning that love was conditional. They listed it for immediate sale. Not market value. Not even close. They accepted the first cash offer that came through, because they didn't have the luxury of waiting. The developer planned to tear it down. Build something new. I drove past the place once during escrow. Not out of nostalgia. I just wanted to see it with clear eyes. Frank and Lorraine were struggling to load boxes into the back of a rusted rental truck. No professional movers this time. No neighbors waving goodbye. Just cardboard, sweat, and silence. The furniture sat awkwardly on the sidewalk, exposed to the sun. It looked small, pathetic. Deanna stood a few feet away, holding a single suitcase, staring at the ground. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked empty. They were relocating to a dusty inland town where the cost of living was low enough for their reduced pension to survive. A 2-bedroom rental, no balconies, no concierge, no valet parking. Just reality. Later that afternoon, we gathered at the closing attorney's office to finalize everything. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights. My lawyer slid the last document toward me and tapped a paragraph near the bottom. "Permanent restraining order," he said carefully. "Once you sign, they are legally prohibited from contacting you or approaching within 100 yards. This is forever." I picked up the pen. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name. The ink was barely dry when Deanna finally lifted her eyes from her paperwork and looked at me. Her face was pale. Her voice was thin. "You've taken absolutely everything from me," she said. "My home, my career, my reputation. I hope you're finally satisfied." I met her gaze. "I didn't take anything," I replied quietly. "I reclaimed what was already mine." Then I stood and walked out. The elevator doors closed behind me, cutting off my parents' pleading voices. As I stepped into the bright California sunlight, something inside my chest loosened. I knew I had just buried the last version of myself that still believed in fixing broken people. 6 months passed, and life became strangely peaceful. Not perfect, not magically healed, but quiet in a way I had never known. I moved into a new apartment overlooking the ocean. I started waking up without anxiety pressing against my ribs. I cooked meals slowly instead of eating over my keyboard. I took long walks without mentally calculating someone else's budget. The silence in my life wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. I ended my career as a ghostwriter and finally put my own name on a manuscript I had been working on for years, an honest account of financial abuse within families. I wrote about golden children, about scapegoats, about the dangerous myth that love requires self-destruction. The book found readers, thousands of them. Emails started pouring in from strangers who saw their own stories reflected in mine. People who had been quietly paying emotional debts they never agreed to. For the first time, I was being recognized for who I was, not for what I could provide. The royalties went into a bank account that only I could access. I spent my money on things that actually brought me joy. A new wardrobe for my book tour, fresh flowers for my kitchen, a weekend retreat by the sea. One afternoon, while shopping in downtown Los Angeles, I found myself walking through an upscale mall I used to avoid because Deanna had practically claimed it as her territory. Luxury boutiques lined the corridor, polished and quiet. I passed them without slowing. Then I turned a corner into the louder section of the mall, where fast fashion stores buzzed with chaotic energy. And that's when I saw her. She was standing near the entrance of a discount clothing store, wearing a bright yellow polyester uniform that fit poorly around her shoulders. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun. No professional blowout. No designer accessories. She was folding jeans while customers knocked piles onto the floor. Deanna, the woman who once mocked me for being a cheap copy, was now apologizing to strangers for wrinkled denim. I stopped walking, not because I missed her, because my brain needed a second to reconcile the image. She looked tired, older, smaller. A rude teenager dropped a soda near her station, and she rushed to clean it up, murmuring apologies. The humiliation radiating off her was quiet but heavy. She must have felt my gaze. Her head lifted slowly. Our eyes met through the glass. Shock crossed her face, then shame, then something like hope. She took a small step toward the entrance and raised her hand halfway, as if asking me without words to come inside, to rescue her, to make things right. For a brief moment, I saw the version of her who used to borrow my sweaters, the version who cried on my shoulder after bad dates. And then I remembered everything, the lies, the loan, the way she tried to destroy me publicly. I reached up and adjusted my sunglasses. Then I turned away. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I didn't pause. I continued walking down the bright corridor without looking back. The encounter lasted less than a minute, but it gave me something I didn't even realize I still needed: closure. As I stepped out into the warm afternoon sunlight, I realized I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel victorious. I felt indifferent. They were no longer characters in my story. They were footnotes in a chapter I had already finished writing. I got into my car and drove toward the ocean with the radio playing softly, knowing that the best revenge isn't punishment. It's building a life so full that toxic people no longer have room to exist in it. 6 months after everything finally stopped exploding, I woke up one morning and realized something strange. My chest didn't feel heavy. There was no knot in my stomach, no silent checklist of other people's problems waiting for me before I'd even brushed my teeth. The sunlight spilled across my bedroom floor, warm and gentle, and for the first time in years, I just lay there and listened to the quiet. Not the lonely kind of quiet, the peaceful kind. I had moved into a small apartment overlooking the ocean. Nothing extravagant, just clean lines, open windows, and the sound of waves rolling in like a steady heartbeat. I learned how to make coffee slowly instead of gulping it between emails. I started buying groceries without calculating how much I'd need to transfer to someone else later that week. My life had become mine. I ended my career as a ghostwriter shortly after the settlement. For years, I had been helping other people tell their stories while hiding my own. But something shifted after everything I went through. I opened the manuscript I'd been quietly working on and replaced the anonymous byline with my real name. The book was about financial abuse inside families, about golden children and invisible siblings, about how love gets twisted when money enters the room. I wrote about being taught that loyalty meant sacrifice, and how long it took me to realize that sacrifice shouldn't mean self-erasure. I didn't expect much when it was released, but people found it. Thousands of them. Messages started coming in from strangers all over the country, people who had been quietly supporting parents, siblings, partners, and cousins while slowly disappearing inside their own lives. People who thought they were alone in their exhaustion. They weren't. Neither was I. The royalties went into a bank account that only I could access. No authorized users, no emergency requests, no guilt-driven transfers. I spent that money on things that actually made me feel alive. New clothes for my book tour, weekend trips to the coast, fresh flowers for my kitchen table. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. I was finally learning how to enjoy my own company. Sometimes, late at night, I would still think about my parents. I wondered if they were adjusting to their smaller apartment, if they missed the house, if they ever talked about me. But I didn't reach out. The restraining order made that impossible. And honestly, it was a gift. Distance gave me clarity. I could finally see the pattern that had shaped my entire childhood. Deanna was protected from reality, and I was expected to fund it. Every time she failed, someone softened the landing. Every time I succeeded, it became an obligation. They called it family. I call it conditioning. For years, I believed my value came from being useful, from fixing things, from making sure everyone else was okay, even when I wasn't. I thought that was love. But love doesn't steal your identity. Love doesn't drain your bank account. Love doesn't humiliate you in public and then expect you to pick up the bill. Real love doesn't require you to disappear. One afternoon, not long after I ran into Deanna at the mall, I sat on my balcony watching the sun sink into the Pacific. The sky turned shades of pink and orange, and the breeze carried the faint smell of salt and eucalyptus. I thought about that night in the restaurant, about how small I had felt sitting at that table, about how my sister had laughed and called me a cheap copy. If I could go back and speak to that version of myself, I wouldn't tell her to be stronger. I would tell her this: you don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your stability, and you definitely don't owe anyone your future. Walking away doesn't make you heartless. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do for yourself. People often ask me if I regret pressing charges against my own sister. They want to know if it still hurts. The truth is, it did hurt. It hurt deeply, but it also saved me. Reporting the fraud wasn't revenge. It was self-preservation. It was the moment I stopped absorbing other people's chaos and started protecting my peace. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped enabling them. There's a difference. I've learned that boundaries aren't walls designed to punish others. They're doors that protect your inner world. And not everyone deserves a key. Today, my life is quieter. Smaller in some ways, bigger in others. I have mornings where I drink coffee by the window and evenings where I read on the couch without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I have friends who don't ask me for money. I have work that fulfills me. I have space to breathe. I don't know what became of Deanna beyond that day at the store. I don't track her anymore. I don't wonder. She's no longer part of my story. And that, more than anything else, feels like freedom. I used to think revenge meant watching someone fall. Now I know better. The real victory is waking up in a life that finally belongs to you. It's choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. It's realizing that peace doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in quietly once you stop inviting chaos to stay. And as I sit here now, listening to the ocean outside my window, I understand something I wish I had learned sooner. You don't have to burn bridges. Sometimes you just have to stop crossing them. Before we close this chapter, I want you to sit with something important. What happened in this story isn't really about money. It's about boundaries. It's about what happens when kindness is mistaken for weakness, and when family becomes a justification for emotional and financial abuse. For a long time, I believed love meant endurance, that being useful made me valuable, that staying quiet kept the peace. But this journey taught me a hard truth. You should never set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. Walking away doesn't make you cruel. Choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. And holding people accountable doesn't make you heartless. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop paying for someone else's chaos and finally protect your own peace. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the one carrying everyone else, I hope it reminded you that you're not alone and you deserve a life that belongs to you. Thank you for spending this time with me. And if you enjoy deep, emotional stories about resilience, justice, and quiet strength, please subscribe to Revenge Tale Society. Your support helps this community grow, and your presence truly matters. I'll see you in the next story.